Yeah.
Okay.
We
Started the
we're
recording.
missing those cider donuts.
I think it's still open for the donuts.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
That's good.
But it's, yes, they
The
have a
kitchen's-
lot of damage to worry about. Oh.
So we were at the.
We're recording.
All right, we might as well get started. Want to thank everyone for coming today. I'm Ed Fitzgerald, the Vice President of the Emeritus Center. I'm subbing for Jim Van Voorst, our president, who wasn't able to attend today. I believe this is our second session of the fall, right?
Second
Scott?
of seven. Yeah.
Second of seven, and I think it's our third annual book club
That's correct.
presentation. And with me is Scott Burge, our program director, and I'm very happy to have Dr. Millicent Eidson with us. Millicent, as you can see, is an Emeritus professor at the School of Public Health. In fact, Mill and I were colleagues. We're fellow epidemiologists,
Oh, yeah.
as is Perry Smith, one of our other colleagues here.
And
We
they
all-
put up with you, Ed?
yeah, well, we put up with each other, you know. The epidemiologists are a difficult lot. Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. Whoa. We could have a conversation afterwards. You heard about him, huh?
The area.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, and I've always known that Millie's a, very skilled epidemiologist, but I never realized she took her epidemiological experience and actually has translated it to mystery novels. So she's gonna be talking to us about some of that experience and her anthrax novel specifically, I think. But in any case, I'll turn it over to Scott, who can do the formal introduction.
With me, it's never really formal. It's a pleasure to get a chance to meet you. Had a couple of great conversations through the internet and talking to Carol, I understand I couldn't meet a more gracious and wonderful person than the person who will be speaking to us today. Dr. Millicent Eidson is the author of a medical thriller series about veterinarian Maya McGuire, who solves disease outbreaks. Wait a minute, I always forget to put my glasses on. Who solves disease outbreaks from animals. The world of Dr. Maya McGuire, called the Mayaverse, is a cross between the TV series All Creatures Great and Small and Rizzoli Isles. Dr. Eidson's author awards include Best Play in Synchronicity. And I gotta ask you what Sting was like. Sting is a bass player and he had a gold platinum album called Synchronicity, and I figured that was part of that whole, no? Okay. And also honorable mention from the Arizona Mystery Writers. Dr. Eidson, or Millie, is an emeritus professor with the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at our School of Public Health. She retired in 2017 after 20 years with UAlbany and the New York State Department of Health. Her career in public health began when she was chosen as one of the few veterinarians accepted into CDC's Epidemic Intelligence Service, or EIS. Then she spent 12 years as New Mexico's state public health veterinarian and environmental epidemiologist before moving east to New York. In her retirement, she's obviously working triple time, Millie continues her public health teaching with a course about zoonosis. Did I come close to that? And climate change at the University of Vermont Larner College of Medicine. This is a course that she created 25 years ago for UAlbany. For her mission of public health communication, she's branched out into creative writing as another way to engage people about public health topics. And we have her here today. Thank you, Mike. There you go. Thank you.
Okay, let's get started. And by the way, anybody who, I've got my email address on the very last slide, and anybody who would like these slides, because I have lots of active links in them, in case you'd like to pursue any of this information, I can send these to you. So I'll stand over here. Let's see. Okay, so first of all, I just want to find out, any of the rest of you into creative writing? Have any of you tried it?
Yeah.
So a few. And did you try to publish it anywhere?
Yeah, I finally ended up having to do it myself. but
Yeah.
And I sold over 500 just on my
Yeah.
own.
Yeah,
So it paid its way.
yeah.
What else can I say?
And what kinds of creative writing? Like a lot of people do memoirs or
It's a
things?
historic, epic historic novel.
Okay, great,
Real people, real
Mhm.
places, real activities.
good. Anybody else? You said yes?
I try.
Yeah,
As an English major,
Mm.
but I'm a sociologist.
Mhm.
And I found myself getting too trapped in the actual sociology,
Mhm.
which is why I was really admiring what you've done in the Mayaverse.
Okay.
Because getting all that medical information
Yeah.
into a story that itself is a story and gripping was more than I was able to handle.
yeah, that's one of the tough things. Anybody else thinking about it who hasn't tried it yet, or anybody tempted? Okay, so,
thinking about doing a memoir.
oh, okay, okay, and a lot of what I'm gonna talk about applies for that as well, so. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna talk about kind of my author journal, and I always loved writing up my scientific papers, and that's one style of writing that I got proud to be good at. But the creative writing is a very different style of writing, and it's a different way of communicating a different audience. And so I've spent my years since retirement in 2017 learning how to do the creative writing to convey the scientific information, which, as you said, is tough. So I'll spend some time talking about that. And then I'll do a little deeper dive into each of the novels that I've written so far and what kind of scientific principles I'm sharing with those novels. So, okay, so my writing history. So of course, like with many of us, it starts out being an avid reader. My mother used to joke that because I would read every night, and my mother used to joke that the roof could fall in on me and I wouldn't notice it because I was such an avid reader at night. But in 7th grade, I did a social science project on forgetting, how the brain forgets things. And they actually didn't even have a big science fair for junior grade, so they put me with the seniors and I won. This was in Tucson, Arizona. And so that was my first time of trying to convey scientific information in a way that was different, so it was through poster boards and all that kind of thing. Then I did an underground satirical high school newspaper in which the faculty never figured out who I was.
Oh dear.
I had to do that because my mother was one of the teachers, so she didn't even know. So and then the summer before veterinary school, my husband was mapping in southern Utah, and I didn't have anything to do for the first time in my life. So I would go up to the high mountain lakes and catch my limit of trout before noon. And I hand wrote a romance novel set in Utah. And but then when I started veterinary school and then got into my career, I never had time for creative writing again. But as I said, I had decades of public health communications and scientific writing. When I retired in 2017 and we moved to Burlington, Vermont, the colleges up there have free university classes for senior citizens. And so I decided to check those out. And I also joined the Burlington Writers Workshop beginning in 2019. Okay. So how I got writing microbial mysteries. In 2019, I ended up signing up for a 3-credit UVM summer creative writing course. So it's one of those summer courses where you condense a whole semester into 1 month. And the requirement was to write a short story, which I'd never done in my life before. So I was really nervous about it. So I decided it had to be writing about something I know, otherwise I'd never pull it off. So I said, okay, I'll do it about zoonotic disease. And I thought I should do it about bubonic plague because in my 12 years in New Mexico is the capital of plague in the United States. And so I was a real expert on bubonic plague. And so I thought I'd write a short story about that. And I actually wanted to really make sure I knew what I was doing. And I wrote the whole short story before the class even started. And the professor liked it at the end of the month class, but he said, you're trying to cram too much into a short story, because at that time I didn't know really the difference between a novel and a short story and how you structure them differently and all that. And he said, you should really try it as a novel. And I said, oh, wow, that'd be fun. And then I got the idea from Sue Grafton to do an alphabetical series. And unfortunately, plague would be at the end of the alphabet. So I decided I better start with anthrax. And so literally, which was not one of the diseases in which I was an expert. So literally from the day the class ended, the next day I started researching and writing anthrax and working 22 hours a day. I was just like really motivated and got the whole initial draft, 88,000 words done in just 1 month. So I was just like, it just like took over, and my husband will tell that I did nothing else except write that book that first month. So my goals in continuing this is lifelong learning, which I know is very important to all of you. So in each book, I'm able to refresh my memory of public health prevention and control tools. I'm able to do a deep dive into zoonotic diseases and complex scientific research. I can consult and learn from others on these topics. I also wanted to educate about public health zoonoses and a veterinarian's role, kind of like I wanted to emulate the West Wing TV show, which I'm sure some of you like, where they were giving like an insider view of government service. I wanted to give an insider view of those of us in the trenches in public health. So I wanted to entertain with compelling characters, vivid settings, exciting plots. I also wanted to enlighten about important issues like climate change, diversity, immigration. So those are worked in there too. And connect with readers and share excitement, insights, and fun. Okay. So the very first novel I wrote was Anthracis, Microbial Mystery, which I've heard a few of you have already started reading. And I was editing and workshopping it with this Burlington Writers Workshop that I mentioned in 2020. So I started it, as I said, in September 2019. In 2020, I started query letters to agents in the winter. And of course, that's when COVID hit. And what all of them were saying is nobody wants to publish and read a book about epidemics when we're in the middle of a pandemic. So they said the topic, forget it. And I also, got some other feedback about things that they wanted changed and that I wasn't willing to change. And so I started then researching independent publishing, and I created Maya Maguire Media, which is named after my main character, Maya Maguire. And I created the Mayaverse website. And then the novel was released as an ebook, paperback, hardcover, and large print in fall 2021. So 2 years after it was begun to do the whole process of editing. So even though the first draft was done in 1 month, and it took me 2 years to do all the editing, polishing, exploring publication. So some people, might release their dirty first draft, but I don't believe in that. I believe in a lot of time in making it as good as you can make it. So I was going to read the first chapter of Anthracis, but a number of you have that already. So I'm going to read the first scene of one of my short stories instead, which many of you probably have not seen. And what I try to do with all the chapters, but particularly what you want to do to grab people at the beginning, is you want to have a mystery mood, you want to have compelling characters and a vivid setting. So this is my collection of short stories. So all these college classes that I've been taking every semester in creative writing, they kept requiring me to write short stories. So I'd write a short story for the class and then submit it for publication and then eventually put it into a book. So I'm going to read you just the first scene from the first short story in here. This one was published in a journal called Danse Macabre in 2021. And it's a novel prequel. It's going to introduce 2 key public health supervisors. Those of you that started reading Anthracis may recognize the names Nancy Bingham and Fred Greenwald. They're the 2 state epidemiologists in New Mexico and Arizona who supervise Maya as an EIS officer. And this is going to show them like 20 years or so earlier. And this was the one that received the award in the year 2020 from the Arizona Mystery Writers. So here's just the first scene. Nogales, Mexico, Tuesday, October 12th, 1993. And I guess I could move on to camera for people who are watching this recording. Okay, feathery feet and a crepitous body slide across my left eyelid. My palm scrapes blue eyeshadow to the creamy pillowcase, plus an inch-long black and gold psychedelic bug which scurries away on jointed legs. A Halloween horror 2 weeks early. Blurry vision of the arresting creature is a clue my debauched night was a disaster. Its larger cousin creeps along my left thigh. While thrusting my leg in the air to dislodge it, I bump the naked backside of the man next to me. He's pudgy, white, with hairy limbs and a smooth back. A sledgehammer pounds from my eyes to the nape of my neck. Trapped against a copper-hued wall, I slither across him, bearskin rubbing as my stomach lurches. After tripping over the rug, I crawl into the mosaic bathroom and lose all those glorious salt-rimmed margaritas. Wymus shrimp, I taste those coming back up too.
Oh, dear.
As I crouch on the blue and white flowered tiles, fingers stroke my short hair. My head arches up, and I recognize him. You okay? His bulging brown eyes are concerned, but meander in his typical distracted and disinterested way. Under the dark hair, too much minutia dances through his prodigious brain. I'm sure he really cares. Fred, can you help me up? After he reaches to grip my arm, I lean over the terracotta sink and rinse the yellow-green bile away. Get yourself together. The deep voice barks from the bed as he tugs on blue boxers and rumpled tan pants. We're late for the lead poisoning talk. For him, the Tuesday morning session of the regional border health meeting is more urgent than washing up. We'll learn about maquiladoras, Mexican factories with insufficient pollution control, but I'm not showing up without a shower. He's gone when I towel off from the tepid but reviving spray. I step into a satin skirt and pull on a matching blazer. Stand out in a crowd, that's my modus operandi. Although we didn't make the best decisions last night, I was smart enough to have our reunion sex in my hotel room, not his. A quick blast from the hairdryer on my mousy brown locks and I'm ready. After riding the creaky elevator to the first floor, at the front desk I call out, "Buenos dias, ¿cómo estás?" to La Chica Bonita, her head crowned by glossy black braids woven with white silk ribbon. As I smile, the wrinkles around my eyes reflect almost 30 years of hot Texas sun. She replies, "Muy bien, ¿y tú?" She has a decade before men start seeing right through her. I'm not late. Dr. Gonzalez, the Arizona State epidemiologist, hobnobs in the ballroom with his Sonoran counterpart. My position as a public health physician started 3 months ago when I finished the Baylor Family Medicine residency. It's an inspiring time. President Clinton appointed the first African-American director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The annual neighbor state gathering is on the Mexican side this year. Until the difficult dawn, I embraced my first visit to Nogales, Sonora. The temperature hit 80 yesterday and music spilled out of Las Cantinas when we strolled for lunch and dinner. Our hosts are relaxed, gregarious, and gracious. The schedule allows time to shop for artesanillas. I have a yen for huichol yarn paintings. Last month, the highlight of the Puerto Vallarta rabies meeting was the night excursion to capture vampires as they darted in to suck blood from the legs of cattle. Jalisco veterinarians pried the bats out of fence nets and wiped warfarin on their backs. In the roost, bats rub the paste on their relatives and they bleed out, dying before they can spread rabies. Sounds barbaric, but it reduces vampires feeding on the toes of sleeping people who suffer horrific foaming at the mouth death. By the time translators don their headsets and everyone settles down, Fred plops on the empty seat beside me. He's in his public health service dress blues, went to his room to change. At the mid-morning break, he seizes my forearm, steering me away from the snacks and posters. Nancy, I don't regret getting carried away after the banquet. 7 years since we were together, but I never stopped thinking about you. We're not going to speak here. I slap his hand aside. Dr. Gonzalez frowns when he sees me. Am I that hungover? He might suspect my dalliance due to our raucous toasting and laughing and singing with the mariachis. Staying glued to the boss's side throughout the remaining presentations is the right decision. Fred can do whatever he needs to by himself to slake his thirst. So that's just the first part of it. So the story continues. Okay. All right, so what I learned in creative writing lessons is emotion is more important than accuracy. And as you noticed in that piece, I was trying to appeal to readers' emotion, even though I'm slipping in a bunch of stuff about how public health is done in the Southwest. And so there's a bunch of decisions, and those of you that are starting with your with your creative writing need to think about this. Any rules of creative writing, of course, are based on consensus, but someone, if they're good enough or famous enough, can break the rules. But in general, they say you want to avoid head hopping, changing the point of view such that the readers can't follow, whose point of view you're in. Too much use of I if you're writing in the first person. You need to decide on past or present tense for your novels or your stories. And usually it's interesting that our brains are hardwired actually to understand things better in past tense. So most of the time you're writing in past tense, and occasionally experimentally, like for short stories, maybe in the present tense. Word choices. This was a big one that I didn't know at all. That first short story that I wrote about plague, I was really proud that I spent all this time with a thesaurus trying to find every fancy word I could use for the word said and put them all into the short story. And the very first thing my teacher came back to me and said, nowadays, we don't want you to use all those. We want you to have minimal dialogue tags. And if you have to use them at all so that the readers know who's talking, use just said and occasionally ask and answered, which was brand new to me. I thought you'd want these fancy, exclaimed and all that. And the reason is that from present day thinking is that those dialogue tags should be invisible, that they just go right by you. And if you use said, then they're more invisible. So you're supposed to avoid adverbs and adjectives. And again, why not use these colorful parts of speeches? But Stephen King is the big advocate about this. And he basically says, and I agree with him now that I understand it, is you need to, adjectives and adverbs often substitute for more powerful nouns and verbs. So if you can use the more powerful nouns and verbs, that's better. You want to reduce question marks and exclamation points, that they're more powerful in their absence or their scarcity. And you want to show, don't tell. Show is more passive, telling is more, telling is more passive and less immersive. And show, don't tell is so complicated, and it applies to memoir writing as well, that you could spend a whole talk just explaining the difference between show, don't tell, but that's a very important part of creative writing. Okay, so people always ask me, how do I write? And every writer is different. So, it's not like it's any prescription. One of the big divisions between how people write are whether you're a pantser, which is a seat of the pants, or a planner. The alliteration P&P. Planner, outline the entire story before you start to write, and it can lead to more straightforward plotting, or pantser, more of seat of the pants. Now people are calling it a discovery writer, which sounds a little better than seat of the pants. So more organic and joyful for some of us, but it can lead to more rewrites if you don't have like your end picked out ahead of time, because you could zigzag and then have to go back and change. So I'm actually a bit of a combination of those. I have my research on these diseases all picked out ahead of time, but I actually don't know where the story is going to go until I sit at the computer with my characters and they just kind of tell me what they want to do. So location and equipment, I have to be at my mainframe computer with two screens, because on one of my screens I have all my research, and on the other screen I have my Word document that I'm writing the novel. More people probably write on laptops, and some people handwrite, some people dictate, a lot of people do work in coffee shops, but I have to be in my place with the two screens.
So do you do it handwriting? Did you handwrite?
I don't handwrite.
No.
Yeah, actually, you just reminded me, I should say, please feel free to interrupt me. Do questions as they come up. You don't need to hold your questions. So.
Well, I was gonna ask.
Yeah.
Do you write as your name? Do you
Yeah.
have a pen name? or
No,
you do
no, I
it
just
real-
did my name. So yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Okay, so this is a huge issue now. And authenticity or own voices. How can you as an author be authentic? And when does your writing cross over into cultural appropriation? So there's lots of different opinions on this. Basically, I would recommend balancing your own creativity with support for other authors speaking with their own voices. If you get my slides, you can go to this link, which actually does training courses and how to write the other. Gender that's different from you, a race or ethnic group that's different from you, age different, in order to do that appropriately. It's really interesting, the issue of whether you italicize words in languages other than English. And the very funny YouTube video here by a Hispanic guy who argues that you should not italicize, even though it's more the norm to italicize the words that are not in English. He argues that that's othering those other words, as if, you know, saying English is the primary language. And of course, in the book that you write in, English is the primary language, but he argues for not italicizing them. And I actually kind of agree with him. So I don't, if you've noticed, I don't italicize my my languages. I use Spanish a lot, and later books I use some French. So. Okay, feedback before publishing. Again, different opinions about this. I believe that feedback is absolutely essential, and that's why I said it took me 2 years to publish Anthracis. I believe in critique groups, and as I mentioned, Burlington Writers Workshop is the one I started with, and then they also recommend genre-specific ones. So then I joined Sisters in Crime, which is a national group, and because at first I was thinking, oh, I'm not really writing traditional crime novels, but in my books, the organisms, the microorganisms are basically the criminals. And so they're kind of like crime novels, and I've got medical detectives. So there's two kinds of readers that I haven't formally used, but some people do. What are called beta readers, where you get a test audience of people who are readers and not writers. So the critique groups are other writers. Beta readers are an audience of readers that provide feedback during the editing or close to publication. And then ARC, advanced reader copy readers, sent before the publication in hopes of book reviews, but no guarantee or quid pro quo. So there's a couple different ways that you can end up getting feedback. Let me talk a little bit about independent versus traditional publishing, because that's a big decision for any of you who do creative writing and then need to decide what you're going to do. The green are like advantages and the red are disadvantages. And so independent publishing is the way I said that I eventually went after checking out traditional publishing. So one of the big advantages of indie publishing is control. You own your own rights. If you go to any traditional publisher, you actually don't own the rights to your own book. And if the traditional publisher decided to drop you, which happens a lot to writers, then you actually have to buy your own book back from them, the rights back. So control of timetable is a big thing, particularly those of us who are senior citizens and want to see your book in print sometime. Traditional publishing is often at least a 2-year or longer time frame between the time that they agree to publish you and when they do it, because they have certain time. They really only publish twice a year and then all that. So you really have no control over the timetable if you're with traditional publishing. You actually, there's been a lot of surveys now. People are earning more money with independent publishing because you actually have total control over your earnings. So you set the prices on the various places that you publish it. Again, you have nothing to do with that if you have traditional publishing, and they take the lion's share and they'll give you pennies, you know, on each copy. You know, on mine, at least I can say so I can earn $1 or $2 on the copy, but if I was traditional, it would be pennies. More direct engagement. So I can even sell my books online on my website, and a lot of authors are starting to do that. I haven't started that yet, but so you can directly engage with your readers. Otherwise, you have no idea. Like if someone buys your book on Amazon, they don't tell you anything about who the purchaser is. You have no clue. So traditional publishing, you might have more limited engagement because you couldn't do that direct sales part. The disadvantages of independent publishing are you're on your own totally for marketing, but nowadays, even with traditional publishing, they don't do much, you know, unless you're very famous, you're pretty much on your own but they might do a little bit for you. You have reduced eligibility for awards. So there's still a whole bunch of awards where they will only accept books for the awards if you're going through one of the traditional publishers. Reduced invitations for talks. There's still that prejudice too, where they'll say only people through traditional publishers can come and give a talk at this conference. And there's still the vanity press stigma that's been around, that if you're an indie published, you know, that you're part of the vanity press, which isn't necessarily so, but there is that stigma. So. Okay, so you need to think about where you're going to fit in your writing. Now, if you're writing just to sell it to friends and family, then maybe you don't have to figure out where you fit. But if you're going to have it in bookstores or other places, you got to kind of fit in a category and have people know where to look for it. So you can be in the genre of creative nonfiction, which CNF, it's abbreviated. It's usually memoirs or essays. But many of the principles that I'm talking about here still apply, even if you're writing a memoir, an essay. You want to grab people with emotion, you want to look at pacing and plot. There's so many genres of fiction, so you think about where you want your story to be placed in a bookstore or a library. And I decided to have mine, it could have been general fiction, but I really felt it fit with mysteries. But then there's all these different kinds of mysteries: thrillers, cozy, suspense, amateur detective, locked room. And so mine are more towards the thriller end. Level of sex, you need to decide, erotica or heat level. There's this one site, but there's multiple places that have these different ratings of, like chili peppers or whatever, and how hot your sex is, and mine is right in the middle. So a few older readers, particularly those who know me, were kind of like, oh, well, there was too much, but mine really are right in the middle. So and then you need to think of the age level of the reader: middle grade, young adult, or adult. And then there's different tropes. So some common but sometimes overused themes are divisive. So romance, you've got enemies to lovers, opposites attract, love triangle, second chance. Mysteries, you can have incompetence police, everybody did it, the killer plays with the suspect. So you need to kind of figure out, where you're going to fit on this. Yeah.
What's a cozy and what's a locked room?
Right. So cozies are extremely popular. They're the #1 most popular genre of mysteries right now.
Oh.
And cozies are the ones that will be low on the sex level or no sex level at all. They're the Jessica Fletcher, amateur sleuth, kind of maybe the old lady is a sleuth or whatever. They're not gritty, grimy, no swearing. You can't have any swearing, you can't have any sex.
Not much violence. See?
No violence. They're often shorter. So they're, cozy, they make you feel good. They're the mystery, but there's no challenging themes. Like I said, I do challenging themes in mine, like immigration and diversity and things like that. So you don't have any of that. So they're like a Hallmark. Like a Hallmark movie kind of thing is what a cozy is.
And what's a locked room?
Locked room is where it's like, what's that?
No, I'm thinking of
Yeah.
it's a closed room.
Right,
where everybody-
Hercule Poirot, the Murder in the Orient Express,
Oh.
where everybody's together, and it has to be one of them because nobody came or went, and then you figure out. So, yeah. Okay, so then you have to decide the lengths and your publishing options. So the shorter works can go to literary magazines and websites. And there's a number of links here. Any of you who want to explore it, get my slides and you can go right to these links. Submittable is a very common one. And in fact, a lot of the literary journals now require you to submit through Submittable. Duotrope gives you, can help you narrow down the journals that you want to go to. You pick, what your story's about and all that, and it'll give you a list of journals. Poets and Writers magazines is another one that gives a lot of lists of journals. And then longer works, novellas are 15 to 40,000 words. Novels, usually less than 100,000 words is the magic spot for them. But some genres, like the big sci-fi fantasy ones, will go longer, but usually less. So usually it's in about 70 to 80,000. Mine, because I said they are dense, there's a lot of complex themes, tend to be in the 95,000. So mine are longer than most. If you want to find an agent, Query Tracker is a good program to check out because, again, you can plug in, what your book's about, and it'll tell you which agents are taking queries. So, okay, so I mentioned having a website is important, and so I created the Mayaverse website. The link is at the bottom there that you can check out. So you need to decide what platform. There's all different services that will host your website, what level of personal effort you're going to do, are you going to pay somebody to set it up for you, going to do it. Websites are essential for getting newsletter subscribers. So that's the one way that you can communicate directly with your readers, is if they will sign up to your newsletter. And there's lots of debate about how often you should do an email newsletter, but I usually do mine 1 or 2 times a month. Some people will do them weekly or more often. But at least that you get the email address of your readers. And your website could be used for direct sales, more complicated, and I haven't done that yet. You can include links to book distributors on your website. It's important to update it frequently. You know what it's like when you go to somebody's website and it hasn't been updated in a long time. So there is some financial investment. And as you will see with the theme of my whole talk, I like the lifelong learning, and so I do everything myself. I don't pay anybody to do anything because I like figuring out how to set up my website and how I want it to look and all that. So, but other people don't want, they just want to write and they don't want to do that other stuff, so they would pay somebody to do it. You do have to do additional required writing, so you should come up with a killer one sentence, a log line, your elevator pitch. You need for the back of your book, you need a blurb, and then you need a longer blurb for the website where like Amazon, where you're going to put your book. You'll need ad copy if you're going to pay for ads. If you're going to get literary agents, you need to write a good one-page query letter. Literary agents will require a synopsis. That's the only time you really need a synopsis is for a literary agent. And that's just basically a plot summary written in present tense, is 1 to 2 pages. If you're doing nonfiction, they will ask for a proposal, which is a multi-page document that basically outlines the whole project. And often you will do that before you even start to write your nonfiction book. And then if you're doing media packages, you need to do additional writing. So there's a lot of different parts of your writing skills that you need to perfect. So the steps in independent publishing: you want to register as a business with your state, create a business name and logo, set up the financial accounts, report business income and losses on your taxes, register to pay sales tax, determine how much of the book production you will do yourself versus contracting for individual components or contracting for a package. And this is a great organization if you're an independent publisher, called Alliance of Independent Authors, or ALLI. Has a lot of guidance documents about how to do all this. So what formats? For print, you can do, you need to choose all kinds of things like your font type and your size, kerning. Anybody know what kerning means? Yeah, get the space between letters. So lots of those kind of details you need to do.
That's changed.
What's that?
Remember when it used to be you had an extra space after a period?
Mm-hmm.
Now they just.
Now it's one space instead of two. Yeah, so a lot of different rules. And the whole big thing on hyphens. So if you pick up any books, if you look at my books, you will notice I will never have a hyphen after a word on the right-hand margin, because I just don't like them.
Oh.
So you control all of that with your software, and the software I use, you can actually say what % of hyphens do you want the software to make for you. And so I adjust the placement of the words on every single line with kerning instead. So it's more work to say no hyphens and still have the lines look good, but I just don't like hyphens. So number of lines at the top and the bottom. So the standard is to not have any single lines at the top of the pages and also at the bottom, although the standard is more strict for the top. So they really want you to avoid it because it just looks bad to have a single partial line floating at the top. So when you get ready to do your print book, then you may have to edit your words and your sentences so that you fall with at least 2 lines at the top. I break the rule for the bottom. People don't care about that so much, but I agree. I think it looks bad to have just a single line. So all these things that you have to figure out. Your indents. So in Emeritus, I didn't like the rule is that at the beginning of a paragraph, you're supposed to not indent. If it's the beginning of a scene or the beginning of the book, not to indent. And I kind of didn't like that rule. So in Emeritus, I didn't indent. I mean, I did indent just like regular paragraphs, but then I kind of got along with the system and started doing it the way you're supposed to. But all those decisions you got to make when you're laying these things out. You need to decide the book dimensions. So these I print in 6x9, which is a little bit larger than some people do 5.5 by 8.5. So you got to decide that. Hardcover nowadays, I've got a couple hardcover Emeritus back there. They're usually without book jackets now, but if you really want the traditional hardcover with a book jacket, you can get that, but that's even more money. All of these print options are expensive. There's a guidance document there for large print if you want to do that, and it's very picky for large print for people who have poor eyesight in regards to the size of the font and the indents and whether you use italics or not and all that. So it's complicated. Ebook, you don't control any of this. It's all in the reader. And so it's, in a way, it's not as nice. Like in Emeritus, those of you who have started it, there's a diary in there. And I wanted it to have I wanted it to look like a diary, and I wanted to place where the line started and ended and all that. And so in the print book, I can control that. In the ebook, I can't really. And so So for me, I like the reading experience, particularly something like Anthracis with its diary in the print book better. But, you know, just something to think about. Audio is very popular, but it's extremely labor intensive and expensive to produce. So I haven't really gotten into it very much. I keep thinking about it, but it's very popular, but just challenging. Video can be used, and we'll try to show a video that I did at the end. Web, Substack, some people are using it for serial segments. I haven't explored that yet, but that's another option. Okay, I mentioned contracting for help. So you need to choose which services you need to complete your publication and promotion process. You can contract for individual components, like you can pay for different kinds of editing. You can pay for proofreading, you can pay for formatting, you can pay for the book cover, you can pay for book tours. There are some companies that will provide a package of all of that, but then it's a lot of money on your part up front. And then you have to be careful that you're not getting one of these vanity presses that will just do it for you and has no quality control. And so there is if you join this Ally, they actually have a list of the companies that are approved so that you won't get scammed.
Now, what about putting illustrations? There's
Right.
some books that have, but, oh, we found a couple note with this. Do any of your books, or is there any?
I don't, because they're not absolutely needed. Some people have suggested, should I have some maps? But the problem is, in my books, I'm going from place to place. So how many maps would I have? So if you're doing a book with illustrations, then it's just going to be more costly to produce it. And it limits you more into perhaps on regards to which printers you use and things like that. But so, yeah. Types of editing. Personal. I do a ton of personal editing, which it takes me a couple of years to finish a book. You can read it out loud yourself, or you can have your software read it to you, and then you'll hear something that you didn't get just by reading it to yourself. I actually find I pick up things in different formats. So, you know, first I'm writing it on screen, and then after I've edited it as many times as I can on screen, then I'm print it out. And I might catch something on print that I didn't see on the screen. Sometimes just changing from Word to PDF. So I write it in Word and I save it as PDF and then read it again on screen on PDF. Somehow, looking at the PDF document, things will leap out to me that I didn't see in the Word. So it's just important to read it in different formats and multiple times so you can catch things. I highly recommend, as I said, workshop or critique groups where you can basically, they read your stuff and you read theirs and you give feedback. And I recommend that actually during the process. You could wait until you finish the book, but I recommend it while you're writing the book. These are different kinds of official editing that you could pay for. So you could pay for someone to do a developmental edit, which they'll look at the bigger picture, character and plot arcs, themes, imagery. Line editing, they're looking for voice, style, readability. Copy editing, they're actually looking for the grammar and the spelling, punctuation. And then proofreading will be at the end, final check for typos. So you can, these are people who make a living doing these 4 different kinds of editing, and you can pay for each kind of these.
This is just kind of a side
Yeah.
question. My scientific career, we went from paper to PDF on everything ultimately. And I read somewhere that if you read the identical paper on a piece of paper versus a image on your
Right.
computer screen, that like the reading speed is a half or is some huge difference between the way you read on a screen versus how you read on a piece of paper. And it had something to do with the way when you have a piece of paper in front of you holding in your hand, there's eye-hand movements that aren't allowed on the screen. But can you comment on the difference
I
between
haven't heard
paper
about
and
the difference in speed, but I
well, that was
definitely.
one thing that I thought was different. And I
Right,
forget
right.
what it was. So.
What I have definitely heard, they've done studies, you know, they can do those studies now where you're in the MRI machine and they have you do things and they can see which part of your brain. So the parts of the brain that light up and are being used are different when you're reading something on paper than on the screen. And so it's, and so they actually say, you know, for children, they're concerned that they're processing less information, that they're getting less information in if they're reading it only on the screen, that you're getting more information in if you're reading it on paper. So that fits with what I said, was I can look at something on screen, I can do it multiple edits, including a PDF on the screen or whatever, and then I print it off on paper and I see things that leap out to me that I just didn't see when they were on the screen.
So
So
the PDF is faster?
I forget what it was now.
Yeah.
No, I think it was the other way around.
Really?
But I forget, there was a big.
Yeah.
And again, I think it would have to do with if I was raised on paper, making that switch versus a kid today where they're raised on the screen. They never look at a paper. I would imagine there's a difference in how old your brain is or something.
I sure.
I would guess that maybe reading on paper is slower because, you know, it's,
I forget what it
I'll
was.
say that.
That's-
That's what I would.
If you can skim this pretty.
yeah,
I might forget.
But-
what-
but anyway.
Again, this is looking at the same
Yeah.
thing. You know.
yeah. I just recommend doing both if you're gonna be editing. Software, another big issue. So I like to write in Microsoft Word, but there's lots of new software that's out there. It's often the standard for critique groups and where you'd write, everybody would write Times New Roman 12-point double-spaced 1-inch margins with the word tracking. And that's the way you would give comments to each other is using the tracking. For formatting the print books, there's a lot of options. I use Adobe InDesign, and as affiliated with the university, you can get a big cut in the cost of the Adobe Suite package. So that's what I do. You just have to give them a university email address, like, you know, ualbany.edu, and they'll cut the press. Yeah. So I use Adobe Lightroom and Photoshop to create my photos and book covers. And again, it's just, I like control and I like the creative processing. So all my books are my own photos. When I use an organism like this that I get from the CDC Public Health Image Lab, then that are free, then I will make it. But most of the time I'm using the setting where a lot of the story takes place. So in Anthracis, a lot of it takes place in Arizona in the Southwest. So I'll use my own photo of that setting. Then you want to convert for ebooks, you need something called an EPUB file. It used to be called a MOBI file, but now it's called an EPUB file. And there's a software called Drafted Digital that will do that conversion from Word for you. And then there's a whole list of other programs that people are starting to use now. And again, if you get my slides, you can get that list. Okay, artificial intelligence, big topic now. So, and there's actually two different kinds of AI. So there's assistive AI and generative AI. So assistive AI is basically what's been around for a long time. So Google is basically, you could call that assistive artificial intelligence, where, you know, you go in and you do your research on Google, or even PubMed, you know, which is where I get all my medical scientific articles. It's PubMed. I mean, it's a computer system that helps me find those scientific articles. There are editing software programs, and I list some of them here. I use the first one called AutoCrit, which is really wonderful. So I put in either a chapter or my whole novel, and they have all these different things that it'll tell you, like it'll tell me adverbs. And then, so I click on adverbs and it'll literally highlight and show me where every single adverb is in the chapter of the book. And then, and how many times you've used it. And then it's up to me as the author, how many is too many, you know? So often my principle is I don't want to use an adverb like maybe more than once in a book, or if I want to use it, if I feel strongly I need to use it more than once in a book, then I want it X number of chapters apart or something like that. So these tools are really nice to help you make decisions, like how many adverbs you want. The other big thing I don't like to repeat words too close to each other. So they'll highlight for me the words that are too close to each other, and then I can make a decision whether I want to change them or not. So all of that is assistive AI. All of that is fine, no problem with that. Nobody has an objection to that. Generative AI was what came on the market a couple of years ago, and that's a whole different thing. It must be reported to the publisher. So now Amazon, if you're submitting your book for publication, Amazon will ask you whether you use, they'll just say, did you use AI? They don't say whether it's assistive or generative, but they're talking about generative. And you have to say yes or no. And they have no way to check on you, whether you're being honest or not. And they won't refuse to publish you. They just want to know, you know, how many of them are being made by generative AI. And millions are being made now by generative AI. So those of us that are putting several years of work into our books, it's hard because so much, I think, junk is coming out because of AI. And it's just swamping, you know, places like Amazon. But so you have to report it both to Amazon and to this other publisher I'll talk about. But there's, as I said, there's no penalty or anything for it. The other place you have to report it is when you apply for copyright. So in this country, you're copyrighted immediately, kind of automatically when you write something. But to register your copyright with US Copyright Office, which gives you a little bit more protection, they again will ask you if AI was used either in your cover or your text, and they will actually not issue you copyright protection if you used AI, if you report it. And so like my covers, when I report to them that I used a CDC image, they will copyright my photo, but they won't copyright, of course, the image that's publicly available. So, so my compromise is I've explored using generative AI, particularly Microsoft Copilot, because it's free and easy, and to get some ideas for marketing and promotion if there isn't any evidence of copyright or plagiarism issues. But I don't use it for my text. So like on a few promotional places, I took my standard biography that I put in the back of all my books and I gave it to Copilot and said, make this more interesting, more compelling. And it came up with some phrases that I hadn't thought of myself. And so on a promotional place, I might use that AI, it's assisted, but some of the words were actually generated. So it's generated. But I would not use, I could not in good conscience use that more jazzed up biography in my book because I want to, tell them I'm not using AI in my book. So big hot issue right now. Okay, marketing and promotion. We could spend months talking about marketing and promotion. And this is harder than writing. So your goal of, but if you think of it as a way to communicate with others, like I'm doing here today, then it's more fun to think of it that way. So there is a lot of free marketing and promotion, doing talks like today, newsletter I mentioned. I write a lot of blogs. I've done a number of podcasts. We're going to show this Power of the Dog podcast. We're going to try to at the end. There is paid advertisement through Amazon and Facebook, but again, very complicated. I tried once for a couple of weeks on Facebook and did not make back in sales what I spent on the ads. So, that's an issue of how much money you want to put in. There are various book contests to charge a fee. There's promotion packages that you can pay for. Sometimes you can get sales tables, like I had a sales table on Saturday at the Albany Book Festival that was free for me, but it's still not free because I have to pay for my transportation, lodging, and all that. But sometimes there will be tables that you'll have to pay for. So it's all your idea of how much time you want. So the free ones, you're putting in a lot of time. The paid ones, probably putting in time and money. So, okay, reviews. Book reviews are highly beneficial for increased ranking and visibility on sales sites. There are some organizations that will write reviews for you, but they can be costly and there's no assurance they'll be good. Kirkus, has anybody heard of Kirkus book reviews? They're the most famous one. They literally charge thousands of dollars for a publisher, or if you're an indie, you're paying it yourself to get the review. You, of course, have no assurance, you don't know what the review is going to look like ahead of time. And if they criticize your book, then they issue that review and you can't tell them don't publish it. I mean, it's out there. So it's a risk and it's costly. If you're lucky, you might get one or two lines in it that you could then use yourself to put on your book jacket or whatever, but it's a risky thing to do. Midwest Book Review I used for Anthracis, and I thought got a nice review that in newer editions of the Anthracis book I've put inside there. So you can get reviews through Amazon, Goodreads, and BookBub. We as authors ethically are not allowed to officially request or give any reward for them. So you can't say, well, I'll give you a free book if you write me a good review. Sometimes you can get inaccurate or spam ones, and it's challenging to get them reviewed. If someone says something that's really totally wrong, basically they just tell you to ignore it. It's difficult to do anything about it. You're really not supposed to respond to the reviews or dialogue or engage at all, but the BookBub site does encourage a little more interaction. And there are some organizations that, through these advanced reader copies, that will arrange to send the book to them in hopes that they'll review it, but you cannot make them do it and you can't give them any incentive other than they got the book. And there's no requirement, and again, you don't know what the review is going to be like, so. Okay, so we've been talking about all the creative writing struggles and decisions and everything. Now I want to switch to actually the meat of the stories and tell you a little bit about the books themselves. So this is about this first book. I call it book 0 in the series, and it's my short stories that I ended up writing for all these college classes. And these were really fun because they were experimental. I could try different styles. I have one here that's called a reverse story, where you start, the first scene is the end of the story, and then you move backwards to see how did you end up at that end. So it's fun to do different things with it. I wrote a graphic poem. So I drew, and the software, I drew a bat outline and then wrote the words going along the bat outline. So it's a poem about COVID. So a lot of fun things to do in here. So here's a list of most of the stories in here. And you can see it's fun because I can do a whole bunch of different diseases there on the left-hand column from all kinds of different sources of exposure. And then you see the titles on there. And here's a trick question for some of you. Why do on some of these, on the diseases, I have them in italics and others not? Some of the public health people may know.
Latin. Yeah, whatever the foreign language.
No?
Isn't it the species and the genus?
Yep. And the big rule is, so CDC, there's sites that have the rules, you know, the official scientific rules about it. And the easiest way, I always look them up, but the easiest way for me to remember is that viruses you don't italicize and bacteria, parasites you do. So viruses are dead things. Bacteria, parasites are living things. And so, but it also has to do with, if you're talking about genus, family, species, and all that, then some you italicize and some you don't. But yeah, I'm always afraid it's confusing for the reader that some, you know, organism names I have italicized and others I don't, but that's the scientific way. So
I like the camel one. I'm gonna read that one.
yeah, that's the MERS virus, which people don't hear about in this country, but it's still going. So you know, the original SARS virus that came to this country, but more to Canada, you know, it kind of disappeared, but MERS came and stayed, particularly in the Mideast, so it's still around today. So those coronaviruses are just fascinating, you know, how many different ones we've had and what happens to them. So here's the fun facts with Bacillus anthracis, and these are all things that you'll learn about in the anthrax book. So some of you haven't finished reading yet. You'll get all of these in the book. And so these are some of my, you know, my scientific sources of different ways. I mean, I of course knew about anthrax, but I'm not sure I knew about all these. Like this Zimbabwe outbreak in the middle there is fascinating. 9,400, almost 10,000 cases with 182 deaths, and mostly cutaneous. And it was one particular part of Zimbabwe, and, you know, in a relatively short period of time, and they have no idea how it started. And some people have even postulated that it might have been bioterrorism, you know, between the different tribal groups, you know, trying to take out a particular tribal group. So yeah, I don't think I'd heard about the lab leak before in the Soviet Union. So it's fascinating, all the different ways that you can get anthrax, and you'll find out about it in that book.
That was one of the things I found interesting in reading the book. I had no idea that there were so many different ways in which it could be transmitted.
Yeah.
What's cutaneous?
Skin.
Oh, just
Yeah.
touching someone.
Yeah, so
Oh.
the leading way now, every year, you know, I'm not sure there are cases every year, but beyond the bioterrorism thing that happened in the United States through the mail, but hide drums is still, we have cases in the United States because people like to import the drums from other countries where they've got anthrax in the animals and in the hides and stuff. And then people here, they're pounding on the drums and the bacteria gets aerosolized. So it can affect their hands where they're pounding, or if it gets aerosolized enough, they can get inhale it or ingest it. So all from the hide drums. So that continues to be a risk in the US. So
So any drum, but
Well, particularly ones imported from Africa and places where they've got a lot of anthrax in the animals, so,
But it has to be leather, it has to be a real animal, not a polyester.
right, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about the outbreak in your,
In Europe,
the heroin injection?
the injection one, yeah,
Sepsis?
Oh,
No, that's right.
yeah, basically, and so it was a different route of inoculation than they had seen before, and so they were getting it basically. So what happened was the heroin, when it's shipped, was wrapped in hides. And then shipped like from the countries where it was like Near East or Middle East, and then shipped to Europe and wrapped in hides.
And the anthrax expressed itself internally or?
Yeah, you would see, you know, particular lesions at the site of injection,
Okay.
and then the internal problems, yeah.
That
Yeah.
bioterror?
No, it's just just natural, yeah. You just ship the packages of heroin in the hives, you know, probably so that people wouldn't see it being shipped, you know, and then it would contaminate the heroin itself, so,
that's just sort of an issue.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so the Borrelia book, some fun facts about Borrelia. So, Borrelia, nobody started the Borrelia book yet? Okay, the Borrelia book, of course, B. burgdorferi is the one that we know about that causes Lyme disease in this country. I actually don't talk about Lyme disease very much in the Borrelia book because everybody knows about it, you know, so what interesting things we're gonna say about it. So Lyme disease does feature in the book, but in a kind of twist way towards the end of the book. So most of the time in the book, I'm talking about all these other weird Borrelias that I certainly hadn't heard about before. And so it allowed me then to go to Europe and go to Portugal and go to Morocco in the book, because you've got all these ones that are causing what's called tick-borne relapsing fever, or TBRF, so they don't call it Lyme disease. And there's often from soft ticks instead of the hard ticks. And then in Europe, a big problem, and it was interesting to write about, was the LBRF, the louse-borne relapsing fever, which is from body lice. And so what they're finding is that people in their refugees in their travels going from like Somalia to Europe, they of course do not have good living conditions during those travels. You know, they're sleeping under freeways or whatever. And so they end up getting body lice, and the body lice transmits B. recurrentis. And then the people will turn up with this LBRF very sick in the other countries. And in Borrelia, Maya McGuire goes to help a colleague investigate LBRF in Norway in refugees from these other countries.
Oh.
So,
Could you elaborate just a little bit on the, almost off the page there, off the screen there, all impacted by climate change?
yeah. So basically these vectors, the ticks and the lice, are being impacted by climate change. And these other issues like immigration, and poverty and all those things. Because in general, these vectors of disease like mosquitoes and ticks like it warmer. And so as the world is warming, it's conducive for these vectors. So and the travel, of course, can transport the vectors too. So climate change plays a role. It's not 100% perfect. Like when you look at projections of Lyme disease in this country, Lyme disease has been exploding north and west into Vermont and into Canada, but it actually reduces a little bit in the southeast. So it can get too hot for some of these organisms. Or the other issue is that the climate is changing faster in the northern states. Like Vermont has the highest number of degrees change. I think it's 2 degrees. At least in 1 year, it was the highest in the whole country in the overall number of degrees changed since I think 1970 or whatever. And so the states that are further north are warming faster, whereas the states that are like in the southeast, where maybe people don't believe so much in climate change, and maybe they have a reason to because their temperatures aren't changing as much. So they would have less of a change in these.
So does that mean your second book, this one, is not located in Arizona?
It starts out in both Arizona and New Mexico, but then she ends up, as I said, going to Norway and Portugal
Yeah.
and Morocco.
Oh, yeah, since that's where she's based.
Right, yeah,
Okay.
My son lives in Phoenix, and
yeah,
they had, what was it, 38 consecutive days of over 100
Yeah.
degrees.
Oh,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, the Southwest is where I grew up, in Arizona, and then spent 12 years with the New Mexico Health Department, so I still love that area, and so my initial books are my character starts there, that's where she starts as an EIS officer with the New Mexico Health Department.
I was recognizing a lot of the places that you were
Yeah.
mentioning
Yeah.
from going out to visit our son.
Yeah, I like to do real places, but then she also gets further afield, and she's not gonna spend her whole career in the Southwest, so.
Really?
Yeah,
I'm curious about the vectors, at least for instance, in the United States, get the hard ticks
Mhm.
for Lyme and for the relapsing fever version. Are the ticks different? Are there two different vectors?
yeah,
And
I can't remember the details of all the ticks now, but yeah, different kinds of ticks, yeah.
and
my.
are they in the same areas of the United States?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
So like one of the important scenes in Borrelia takes place in the Grand Canyon, Havasupai Falls, the beautiful
Oh,
falls
yeah.
there, and a Native American reservation there. And that's one of the few places in the United States, and I think that was the Miyamoto outbreak. There's only a couple places in the United States where they found that tick. So,
Because it's not as common as Lyme
Right.
disease, obviously.
right, yeah.
And I was wondering whether doctors get the two diseases mixed up if they present the same. But
Right,
I
yeah,
don't know.
yeah, that can happen. The TBRF signs are a bit different from Lyme disease. You don't, for instance, usually have the bullseye rash with the TBRF, so, yeah. Okay, fun facts for Corona.
Oh,
So Corona was initially the most challenging book to write because, we all lived through COVID, and I wanted to pass the smell test. I wanted people to say, yeah, it educates me, gives me the inside look of what I experienced, but it has to match. And so this was really challenging because it was written, the scenes take place in 2020 when COVID is just starting, but it was written in 2022. And so I had to go back. And so for every day of the book story, I had to find through newspapers and agency websites exactly what was happening at that time, so that my characters were experiencing. So, I had to know when the Arizona Health Department lifted their restaurant guidelines, the exact day, and when the New Mexico Health Department allowed people to go to gyms again, and when the World Health Organization changed this guidance and that. So it was really challenging and very slow going to make sure that my characters were living through the outbreak as it really occurred. But I focused in the Corona book on things that people would probably not know about. So I focused quite a bit in the Corona book on mink. And mink farming is a big industry in the United States, and I hadn't realized this. There's 275 mink farms that are legal in 23 states, and they were affected by COVID. So and so it's a big part for both the health departments that had these mink farms, more in the West, but some in the Midwest. And the USDA to come in and try to control those outbreaks. Mink farming is even bigger in Europe, and they responded more aggressively to the COVID than we did. And they would basically, if there was any COVID in a mink farm, they would euthanize all the thousands of animals at that mink farm. We did not do that level of control in the United States. And so, really shut down that industry in the EU. But now, that COVID's become kind of an endemic, people are lobbying to reopen a number of them. And some of them have reopened, but people are also saying, we'd really like to just eliminate that industry. So the EU will decide in 2026 whether to eliminate the industry entirely from the EU.
Were they ever really implicated in the pandemic?
Well, there were a few people that got it from mink, primarily the people taking care of the mink. It spread from the mink to some other species like cats that would be feral cats that would be roaming around. So in general, with these other animals, the evidence appears to be from us to the animals rather than vice versa. But there have been a few cases that were from animals to people. So, so the people to animals doesn't play as big a role as the person to person. But in regards to perpetuating the outbreaks, there was certainly a lot of worry with these mink farming. Particularly, there was worry about it spilling over to wild mink, and then you would establish a reservoir of COVID in the wild animals. There was a lot of worry about that. And in fact, in the United States, it did spill over to some wild mink, but didn't become established enough to
So there is no current reservoir in wildlife for any of them?
Well, it depends on your definition of reservoir. It is currently in deer throughout the United States. So they're, every time they look, they're finding positive deer. So then they don't know how they got it. The estimates is that somehow, we know that it's shed in wastewater. And so the wastewater getting out onto crops and things like that, it was probably how the deer picked it up, and then maybe deer to deer. And there have been a few human cases, again, that appear when you look at epidemiologically at it, that it looks like the deer gave it to the people, but just a few. So, so it is now established in the deer in the United States, but doesn't people worry about whether that would be a reservoir in regards to posing a risk for a human outbreak? But so far, it's not spilling over to people very much. So,
what about the civet cats?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different species that have become infected in zoos and overseas. And again, figuring out what the role they have. So, it gets into that last bullet point there, lab versus nature origin, and we'll probably never know for sure because China isn't sharing as much information as we would like. But I lean towards the nature origin just because we know it happens. We know it happens all the time. This is the third big outbreak of COVID virus that we've had that apparently spilled over from nature, and we know how it occurs. And but it could have been lab as well. So yeah, these other the host species appears to be bats. As bats are the host species for a number of these viruses, but that doesn't mean that people are getting it from the bats directly. It could be through these intermediate species. So yeah, so the corona goes into a number of these issues that people might not be aware of, and so that's the fun part of the corona book.
Are pangolin the big part of that too, do you think?
It's one of these in-between ones that they don't know how often they play a role, but yeah.
I heard they got sick ones from South America, so the Chinese could eat them.
Yeah. That's, and right now I'm writing the Ebola book, and it's the same issue. Bushmeat or eating wildlife is a risk, and that's the source believed for Ebola as well, as eating the bushmeat. So it's not necessarily eating the bats, but the bats infect other animals, and then people are eating those other animals. But they could be eating the bats too. So.
They do eat bats, don't they?
Yeah, some people do. Okay, fun facts for dengue, the book that I just published this summer. #1 mosquito-borne disease in the world. One statistic says there's over 100 million cases every year. I saw another one that said over 300 million a year. Like a lot of these diseases, there's a lot of asymptomatic infections, and so getting an accurate projection of how many cases is difficult. Primarily the Aedes mosquitoes. Aedes aegypti is a main one. It's the most competent vector. It's a daytime mosquito, urban. Aedes albopictus, which we have in this region. We don't have Aedes aegypti, but we do have the Aedes albopictus, can also spread it. It's much more widespread in the US, lives longer. It's a little bit less competent than Aedes aegypti, but we are having, some states in this country are having local transmission. So most of the day, New York has a lot of dengue cases, but they're imported cases. But there are states like Florida, Arizona, a couple of years ago had the first local transmission of dengue in the Phoenix area. And I used that as a model for what happens in my dengue book.
What's a competent mosquito?
It all
Since
has,
there's less competent,
Right.
A is less
it
competent.
has
Competent.
It has to do with, first of all, the lifespan of the mosquito. So if it lives longer, then it can spread more. It also has to do with where they like to live and, you know, do they bite other animals primarily or do they bite people
So
primarily?
it's a measure of how efficiently it
Yeah,
transmits the
yeah,
disease. Okay,
yeah.
okay, I just,
Yeah.
that looked funny to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, you damn incompetent mosquito.
So-
Judgment.
Dengue was really difficult because the science on dengue control is really complex. And so it was really fun learning about that. The Philippines had for a few years an educational campaign where literally every single Philippine citizen was ordered to dump out all their water at 4 p.m. So no matter where they were, any water that they had in, you know, flower pots or whatever, they were supposed to dump it out at 4 p.m. And, you know, they felt like that was the only way to get control because they just had such bad dengue outbreaks. You can do aerial insecticide sprays, but then the mosquitoes build up resistance and then
Yeah.
become less efficient. There's this new one called Wolbachia, which is really interesting. It's a bacteria that gets injected into the eggs and it blocks the virus from growing in the mosquitoes. So a number of places around the world are trying this now. Sterile mosquitoes is another one where you irradiate the males, so it doesn't kill them, but it just makes them sterile. And then when they mate with the females, then you get unfertilized eggs. So you're hoping that they will competitively mate with the ones that you didn't sterilize and then reduce the number of eggs that end up being infected. And they're exploring genetic modification, both to modify the mosquito and modify the virus to try to control dengue. So lots of there's worry about the number of dengue cases in the next 50 years tripling around the world because of the climate change.
How long has dengue been a serious public health risk, and how does its introduction interface with malaria?
Part of the problem is that when these symptoms are all nonspecific. And so, you know, initially you don't know what somebody has. And so that's one of the complications. It's been around for a long time. I don't know what the earliest cases would have been.
It was only 50 years or 100 years.
At least that, yeah. Yeah, so it's been around for a very long time, probably longer than that. It's a different mosquito. So, you know, some of the symptoms end up being different, but the initial symptoms of, you know, fever and not feeling well, maybe some GI symptoms, there's so many diseases that have that, so that can be difficult, and the control can be different because of the different mosquitoes, so. But yeah, malaria is not as widespread because the Anopheles mosquito is not as widespread, so. Okay. All right, so to finish up, we've been talking about all kinds of complications of these little tiny microbes. And so we thought we'd just have a little humor here. Couple scientists doing infectious microbe research. And he said the most important thing in this job is not letting the little things get to you. So
There's more of them than us.
yeah. So here's my, if anybody wants to jot down my email addresses, I've got 2 on there. I've got my Albany address, email, and then my home email address. And then I've got links to social media and all that. And as I said, you can have the slides with these links if you just email me and I can email them back to you.
How did you come to just call your heroine Maya McGuire?
So Maya was a name that I was always very fond of, particularly anybody who's noticed my daughter is in the back is Asian. And in honor of her, I wanted to have my heroine be a Chinese adoptee as well. And Maya was a name that I particularly liked, particularly because of both Maya Angelou and I'm forgetting her name now, who built the Vietnam Memorial. Yeah, Maya Lin. So I just like that name. And then she's adopted, you know, into a family. I'm part Irish, part Norwegian. So the family that Maya's adopted into is Irish heritage. And so I wanted an Irish heritage McGuire name. And then I also like the alliteration. So yeah. Okay, so now we'll do questions for a few minutes, and then after we stop recording, after the questions, then we'll try to do this little YouTube video if we can make it work, but otherwise you can always go to YouTube and see it yourself. So we'll do a few minutes for questions and then we'll switch over. Any remaining questions? Yeah.
Are you comfortable rendering an opinion as to what happened with the anthrax scare? In the United States with the strain that they found and who they blamed it on and all the politics involved.
Right.
Has there ever been a resolution of that?
Well, again, the scientific consensus is that it was Bruce Ivans.
It's been suicide.
Right, yeah, yeah, and I realize that you can't get everybody to agree on those things, but I've looked over the FBI report and all that, and it's.
That is the consensus.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and he did it because he wanted more money for his research, for his anthrax research,
Oh,
so,
Come on.
yeah.
Well, way to go.
Yeah,
So on that note, I'll just say, when I was at Four Corners a million years ago, there was a T-shirt that I should have bought. Land of the Flea, Home of the Plague.
Mhm.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Still that?
yeah, yeah,
What did it say?
Land of the Flea, Home of the Plague.
yeah. Yeah, plague was an interesting disease to do a lot of research on when I was there, and then, of course, in New York, after I came, then we got hit with West Nile virus that I worked with Perry on, and Perry was one of the first people to say to me, because the crows were dropping like flies
Yeah.
because they're so sensitive to it, and so we said, maybe we should make a surveillance system with the birds. And nobody had really done that before, and so we got it all set up and everything, and then CDC liked it so much, and they adopted it for the whole country, the bird system. So, in fact, so then we had West Nile hit, and when I was in New Mexico, we had hantavirus hit for the first time in this country in New Mexico, and then they found out that it was, throughout the whole Western Hemisphere, and so a former public information officer for the state health department said, nobody should hire Millie because she's like Joe Blitzfix. Wherever she goes, within a year or two, there'll be some big outbreak, that'll happen. So.
Could you comment on the transition to screen, either movies or TV? I remember as a kid, the Andromeda strain, it was just, it fascinated me
Yeah.
about the whole public, and I assume that was a novel at some point.
Yeah,
right?
it was. Yeah,
But had-
Michael Crichton, yeah.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
have you ever, or can you comment on, are there, if some of these books take off,
Right.
you'll be
Yeah.
approached by
Yeah.
movies or television or?
Talking to other author, it's a real mixed blessing because presenting things on the screen is a different format and they have to do things differently. And so a lot of authors aren't happy with what the compromises are made. And often you end up selling it and then you have no control as an author over it. So it's kind of a mixed feeling, but getting your ideas out there to a bigger audience can be fun too. So a lot of those big ones, Michael Crichton was a physician and he wrote Andromeda, and others. His latest one that just came out, which I enjoyed, was called Eruption, takes place in Hawaii. And he had started the book, and then after he died, then his wife hired James Patterson to finish the book. And it's a stereotypical thriller. It doesn't delve into characters very deep like I like to, it's much more boom, boom, boom in regards to the action. But I like that it's science-based. But his books, Michael Crichton's books, and Robin Cook, those people, they like to make up viruses. So, it's totally brand new things. So it's more into science fiction, and they're very exciting. But I think public health as it is lived is pretty exciting. So that's my personal mission, is I don't make up anything. Every single case description that you see in a book, I got from a scientific publication. And every single way that somebody can get a disease, again, I got from a scientific publication. Because I just think these diseases and the way you fight them are exciting without making things up. I mean, I make things up into which characters get them and when, those kind of things, but the science in them is true. So yeah, a lot of those novels that get made into movies are pretty exciting, but they're more fictional in regards to the science.
There was one on the HIV that came out in the movies in the last couple of years. So they went
Yeah.
into the politics and dynamics of the different research groups.
And then one that was a little bit closer, it wasn't fiction, it was The Hot Zone, that was about Ebola rescue. And, but again, and this is a thing as an author that you always face, is Ebola Reston focused just on USAMRIID, the US Army lab, as the big heroes that solved the Ebola Reston case. And so the people at Virginia Health Department, of course, that were at the center of everything, that were totally left out of both the book and the movie by the author, and we're pretty pissed about it. And but it is, now that I'm a creative author, I face the same thing. You can't, in any outbreak, there's a huge number of people that work together on things, and you just can't have that many characters in your book. So you have to simplify, and you know, and for instance, my character, Maya McGuire, I mean, what are the chances that in her first year as an EIS officer, she'd do an A disease, anthrax, and then the second year would be a B disease, Borrelia, the third is corona, and then dengue, you know, so there's some suspension.
Something suspicious about that.
Yeah, and I have to simplify the number of characters, so that's a challenge to do that, yeah.
First a compliment and then a comment. The compliment is I went into this reading Anthracis thinking, how the hell is she going to be able to pull this off because of all the technical detail? And you did. I thought I really enjoyed the book. I thought it was very well written. I don't want to put you in the same class, but the only other person I've ever read who could take real scientific facts and turn it into interesting fiction was Isaac Asimov. And so I'm very impressed by what you've been able to do with this.
Good, thank you.
Second, a comment, you were noting that when you were talking about when you write the story that you are just supposed to do a lot more show than tell. I'm an experimental social psychologist, and there are a lot of social psych experiments where, first of all, they don't really even actually have them in the situation. They're called vignette studies. And you're simply telling people, imagine yourself in this situation. I have real suspicion about a lot of those studies because of that. But even in the kind of work that I do, I am interested in looking at things like race and gender and how they affect people when they interact in groups under highly controlled conditions. And some people have been in the habit of saying, oh, I see we have a young man from St. Rose, doesn't exist anymore, and a young woman from New Albany here today, which is telling them, as opposed to having them introduce themselves. And then you don't even have to mention the gender, because for most people, they simply say, hey, I'm Joe Blow from Niskayuna or something like that. It is so much more effective in creating the reality of the situation that people are in, if you're just simply showing them behaving in a way that accommodates that.
Yeah, it's all in the words that you choose. Are you putting them into the scene as opposed to using passive words and saying there is or it is or whatever, so, yeah.
That also ends up tied in with whether you need to use all these things, all the different words for said.
Right.
And all the adjectives and adverbs.
Yeah.
I read the Andromeda Strain probably in my 20s. I was very excited when I started to read, and I'm not sure if my memory serves me correctly, but the thing about the Andromeda Strain that I found so intriguing was the fact that it just kind of disappeared. There was no, you know, and these, so far in the alphabet, these are still ongoing public publishing. Right. Yeah, so I was very disappointed and have not read any about the Crichton since then, because it was just kind of like, oh, never mind. Yeah. You know, and I don't think that's what science is.
Well, on the other hand, these are all real.
Right.
So if you read in bed, you can read Crichton a lot easier because you know that it's.
Anthrax is on the street. And
Let's thank Millie for such a wonderful. In 2 weeks, we will have Sheila Curran Bernard here. Sheila is a hot topic around the place because she just wrote a book and soon to be a screenplay on the biographical treatment of lead belly in the old